I remember the exact moment everything changed. It was a Tuesday afternoon in March, and I was standing in the executive washroom of Henderson and Klein Financial, adjusting my Armani tie in the mirror. I had just closed a deal worth $3 million, and I felt invincible. The world was mine. At 32, I was the youngest vice president in the company's history, driving a Porsche 911 Carrera, living in a penthouse downtown with floor-to-ceiling windows overlooking the harbor, and dating a model whose face graced magazine covers. Jennifer. Even her name sounded expensive. That's when he walked in. Miguel, the janitor. He was probably in his 50s, though years of hard labor had aged him beyond his time. His uniform was clean but worn, the kind of worn that comes from washing the same clothes 1,000 times because you can't afford new ones. He carried that yellow mop bucket with quiet dignity, moving through the world as if apologizing for taking up space. He nodded at me respectfully, the way he always did, and began cleaning the mirror next to mine. I don't know what possessed me that day. Maybe it was the adrenaline from the deal. Maybe it was the 3 glasses of Macallan 18-year I'd had at lunch with the clients. Or maybe it was just who I truly was back then. A monster in an expensive suit. But as I watched him work, methodically wiping down the marble countertop, I felt this surge of contempt. Here I was, master of the universe, and here he was, pushing a mop at his age. The contrast felt like validation of everything I believed about the world, about hierarchy, about who mattered and who didn't. He accidentally bumped my shoulder with the mop handle while reaching for the paper towel dispenser, and something inside me snapped. I turned to him, my face twisted in disgust, and said words that would haunt me for the rest of my life. "Watch what you're doing. You're only good for cleaning anyway. That's all people like you will ever be good for. Maybe if you'd made better choices, you wouldn't be here at your age doing this pathetic work." The look on his face. God, I can still see it perfectly, burned into my memory like a photograph. It wasn't anger or even hurt. It was something worse, something that took me years to understand. It was a kind of resigned sadness, as if he'd heard variations of this his entire life and had long ago stopped being surprised by human cruelty. He simply nodded, apologized quietly in his accented English, said, "Yes, sir, I'm sorry, sir," and moved to a different part of the bathroom. I laughed, actually laughed, fixed my tie one more time, and walked out feeling like a king returning to his throne. I went back to my office and forgot about him within minutes. That's how little it meant to me. That's how insignificant he was in my world. I had another meeting, another deal to close, another ladder to climb. The encounter evaporated from my mind like water on hot pavement. For months later, the financial crisis hit. Not the big one everyone knows about, the 2008 collapse that's in all the history books. This was a smaller catastrophe that devastated our sector specifically, a perfect storm of bad bets on pharmaceutical derivatives that imploded overnight when a major drug trial failed. Henderson and Klein had leveraged everything on these derivatives. Everything. We'd been so confident, so certain of our genius. The FBI showed up on a Wednesday morning in June. I was in a meeting when I heard the commotion. Our CEO, Richard Henderson himself, was being led out in handcuffs. His face was gray, his expensive suit somehow looking cheap in that moment. By noon, federal agents were in every office, seizing computers, files, everything. By Friday, I was unemployed, my stock options worthless, my reputation in tatters. The industry blacklisted me. Not because I'd done anything illegal, the investigation cleared me personally, but because I was associated with the scandal. In finance, perception is reality. No one would touch me. I sent my resume to every firm in the city, then every firm in the country. Nothing. Not even interviews. The few former colleagues who answered my calls told me to wait it out, that maybe in a year or two, but I could hear in their voices that they didn't believe it. My savings evaporated with terrifying speed. The penthouse went first, a luxury I'd taken for granted suddenly impossible to maintain. Then the Porsche, sold at a loss to a dealer who knew I was desperate. Then Jennifer, who sat me down in a coffee shop and explained, with what she probably thought was kindness, that she needed someone more stable. She was 26 and wanted security. I was 32 and had nothing. Within 6 months, I was living in a studio apartment in a neighborhood I had previously only driven through with my doors locked. The kind of place where you hear sirens at night and arguments through thin walls. The kind of place I'd spent my entire adult life trying to escape from. I'd grown up poor, worked my way through state school, clawed my way into finance specifically to never be poor again. And here I was, right back where I started. I sent out hundreds of resumes. Thousands, maybe. I applied to everything, anything. Banks, hedge funds, insurance companies, retail management positions, sales jobs. Nothing. The longer I was unemployed, the more unemployable I became. Gaps in resumes are like blood in the water. Every rejection made the next one more likely. Desperation is a cruel teacher. When you've tasted caviar and champagne, going back to ramen and tap water feels like death. But pride dies slower than comfort. It took me another 3 months before I finally accepted a job. Any job. The only place that would hire me was a commercial cleaning company called Brightway Services. They needed night shift workers. The pay was $9 an hour. Minimum wage. I would be cleaning office buildings from midnight to 8 in the morning. My first night, I stood in the supply room at 11:45 p.m., staring at the mop and bucket, and I thought about Miguel. I thought about what I'd said to him. The universe has a sick sense of irony, I realized. Here I was, the man who'd said cleaning was all some people were good for, now doing exactly that. I wanted to quit before I even started, but my bank account had $17.32 in it, and my rent was due in a week. I needed this job more than I'd ever needed anything. The work was harder than I'd imagined. Not just physically, though my body ached in places I didn't know existed. My hands blistered from scrubbing. My back screamed from bending and lifting. My knees protested every time I knelt to clean baseboards. But the physical pain was nothing compared to the invisibility. That's what broke me in those first weeks. The complete and total invisibility. I'd spent my entire adult life being seen, being important, being someone whose opinion mattered. People stood when I entered rooms. Assistants anticipated my needs. My name on an email meant it got read first. Now I was the person people looked through. Office workers staying late would walk past me as if I were furniture. Sometimes they'd leave their trash on the floor right after I cleaned, not out of malice, but out of complete indifference to my existence. There was one particularly bad night, maybe 2 months in. I was cleaning the executive floor of a venture capital firm. A young guy, couldn't have been more than 28, was working late. He was on the phone, pacing, talking loudly about a deal he was closing. I heard the numbers. It was a small deal by my old standards, maybe 200,000. He was treating it like he discovered electricity. And he kept dropping trash, absently, as he paced. Crumpled papers, empty coffee cups, just letting them fall wherever. I cleaned up after him 3 times. Each time, within minutes, he dropped something else. And I realized he genuinely didn't see me. I wasn't a person to him. I was part of the building's infrastructure, like the air conditioning or the lights. Automatic. Invisible. Irrelevant. I went into the bathroom on that floor and I broke down. I sat in a stall and cried like I hadn't cried since I was a child. Not because of the trash or the work, but because I understood, finally understood, what I'd done to Miguel. I treated him exactly like this young man was treating me. Worse, actually. I'd added cruelty to indifference. And Miguel had gone home to his family every night carrying that weight, and he'd come back the next day and done it again, because what choice did he have? The shame was overwhelming. But shame alone doesn't change anything. It's just another form of self-indulgence. So I went back to work. I finished my shift. I came back the next night and did it again. Around 3 months in, I started noticing things. One night, about 3 weeks in, I was cleaning the executive floor of a tech company called Innovate Labs. The CEO had left his office unlocked, and I saw something that made me stop. His desk was covered in papers about a cleaning contract dispute. They were paying Brightway Services $75,000 a month for our crew of 10 people working 5 days a week. I did the math in my head, the finance skills still sharp. Brightway was paying us $9 an hour. Even with payroll taxes and basic overhead, the numbers didn't remotely add up. They were pocketing at least 60% of what clients paid. I started paying attention after that. I looked at every contract I could find, every invoice left carelessly on desks. I talked to other cleaners during our brief breaks. There was Maria, a woman in her 40s from the Philippines who'd been a nurse before immigrating. There was Ahmed, an engineer from Syria whose credentials meant nothing here. There was Luz, a teacher from Venezuela who spoke 5 languages fluently. And there was Miguel. I found him 3 months into my tenure at Brightway. I was assigned to a new building, and there he was, mopping the lobby. When I saw him, my heart stopped. I thought about walking away, requesting a different building, avoiding him forever. But I didn't. I approached him during the break, introduced myself as if we'd never met, and asked how long he'd been doing this work. 15 years, he told me. 15 years of night shifts, of invisible labor, of saving every penny he could. He was trying to bring his children from Guatemala. His daughter wanted to be a lawyer. His son was good at mathematics. Miguel's wife had died years ago, and he was alone here, working, waiting, hoping to reunite his family. I wanted to apologize right then. I wanted to confess, to beg forgiveness. But what would that accomplish? It would be about making me feel better, not about helping him. So instead, I just listened. Over the following weeks, during breaks, I learned his story. He'd been a high school principal in Guatemala City. A good school, a respected position. But the gangs had moved in, demanding money, recruiting students. When Miguel refused to cooperate, they threatened his children. Specific threats. Detailed threats. He'd fled with nothing, sent his children to live with relatives in the countryside, and come to America alone to earn money to bring them safely. His teaching credentials meant nothing here. His experience, his education, his entire professional life, erased. So he cleaned. And he did it with dignity, with thoroughness, with pride, because dignity wasn't about what you did but how you did it. I learned that most of the cleaners had similar stories. They weren't uneducated or unskilled. They were displaced, credentialed in systems that didn't transfer, trapped by circumstances beyond their control. They were teachers and nurses and engineers and accountants, working night shifts cleaning toilets because it was the only option available. And they were being exploited. Systematically. Brutally. The cleaning companies were making millions by underpaying workers and overcharging clients, and nobody questioned it because cleaning was invisible work done by invisible people. Something shifted in me during those midnight shifts. Maybe it was shame, maybe it was redemption I was seeking, or maybe I just saw an opportunity. But I started developing a plan. I had skills from my finance days, skills that nobody could take away no matter how blacklisted I was. I knew how to read contracts, how to spot inefficiencies, how to build financial models, how to pitch to clients. What if I could create a cleaning company that actually treated workers fairly and still competed on price? The idea consumed me. I spent every free moment working on it. I used the computers at the public library during the day, researching market rates, labor laws, business structures. I talked to every cleaner I worked with, asking about their experiences, their needs, their frustrations. What would make this work better? What would make it fair? What did dignity look like in practical terms? I learned that the cleaning industry operated on massive inefficiency. Companies had layers of management, expensive downtown offices, and huge marketing budgets. They paid workers minimum wage but charged clients premium rates, pocketing the difference. But what if you eliminated the waste? What if you paid workers well, charged clients fairly, and just ran lean? The math actually worked. It was tight, but it worked. After 8 months of research, I had a complete business plan. But I had no money, no credit, and no credibility. Every bank laughed me out of their office when I tried to get a loan. My old colleagues wouldn't return my calls. I was nobody, a 33-year-old former executive working as a janitor with a crazy dream. Nobody believed in my vision. Most people thought I was delusional. That's when I remembered something from my old life. There was a small business incubator program called the Fresh Start Initiative that I'd once reviewed for investment potential when I was at Henderson and Klein. They provided seed funding for entrepreneurs from disadvantaged backgrounds. I'd rejected it back then, written a memo about how it wasn't scalable, about how the returns were too low to justify the risk. Now, I applied to it with everything I had. The application process was brutal. They wanted a business plan, financial projections, references, a personal essay. I worked on it for 3 weeks, writing and rewriting, making the numbers sing. I knew I had one shot. If they said no, I had nowhere else to turn. The interview was scheduled for a Friday morning at 10. I'd worked my shift from midnight to 8, gone home and showered, and put on my one remaining good suit. It didn't fit quite right anymore. I'd lost weight from the physical labor. But it was all I had. The interview panel consisted of 3 people. There was Dr. Sarah Kim, a professor of social entrepreneurship. There was Marcus Johnson, who'd built a successful minority-owned construction company. And there was Father Michael O'Brien, who ran a network of job training programs. They sat across from me in a small conference room, my business plan in front of them, looking at me with barely concealed skepticism. Dr. Kim spoke first. "Mr. Thompson, I have to say, your application raised some red flags. You were a vice president at Henderson and Klein, a firm that was shut down for financial fraud. Now you want us to fund a cleaning company? Help us understand what we're looking at here." I took a deep breath. I prepared for this moment, rehearsed various approaches. But sitting there, under their scrutiny, I realized that anything less than complete honesty would be a lie. So I told them everything. I told them about Miguel, about what I'd said to him in that bathroom, about who I'd been and what I'd valued. I told them about my fall, about my humiliation, about learning what it meant to be invisible. I told them about the exploitation I'd witnessed, about the skilled immigrants working for poverty wages while companies got rich. I told them about my plan to change it, to build something different. And then I said something I'd never said out loud before. I deserve everything that happened to me. Every bit of it. I was cruel and arrogant, and I treated people like they were less than human. But the workers I want to hire, people like Miguel, they don't deserve to be exploited. They didn't do anything wrong. They're just trying to survive and support their families. This business isn't about me. It's about proving that you can run a company ethically and still succeed. It's about creating jobs that allow people to live with dignity. And if you don't fund me, I'll find another way, because this is the only thing I have left that matters." The room was silent. Then Father O'Brien leaned forward. "Son, why should we believe you've changed?" People say a lot of things when they want money. I thought about that. You shouldn't believe me, I said. You should fund me anyway, not because I've changed, but because the business model is sound and the need is real. Judge me by what I do, not what I say. Put conditions in the contract. Require audits. Mandate worker protections. Don't trust me, trust the structure. They excused me and deliberated for 45 minutes. When they called me back in, Dr. Kim spoke. We're going to give you $50,000. But Father O'Brien is right to be skeptical. So here are our conditions. You'll have quarterly audits. Workers must be paid at least $15 an hour, with health insurance starting day one. You'll implement a grievance system so workers can report problems anonymously. And if we find you violated any of these terms, we take back the company. Understood? I understood. I signed the papers that afternoon. I called my company Dignity Services. The name was intentional, almost defiant. Every worker would earn a living wage, have health insurance, get profit sharing. I would charge clients slightly less than the big companies by cutting out the middleman waste and actually running efficiently. It was risky, maybe impossible, but I had to try. The first 6 months nearly destroyed me. I was owner, operator, cleaner, salesperson, bookkeeper, and customer service all at once. I worked 20-hour days, sleeping in 4-hour chunks. I cleaned offices at night and pitched to clients during the day, often in the same clothes, too tired to care how I looked. Most clients said no. They had established relationships with big companies like Brightway and saw no reason to risk it on some startup run by a disgraced finance guy who was asking them to pay almost the same amount for feel-good labor practices. Why would they care how much the cleaners got paid? It wasn't their problem. But slowly, painfully, I got clients. The first was a small law firm, Chin and Associates, run by an immigrant lawyer named David Chin, who understood what I was trying to do. He gave me a chance on a 6-month trial. Then a startup called Tech Forward, whose founder had grown up poor and remembered what it was like. Then another. And another. And the workers I hired, I trained them not just to clean, but to take pride in their work. I paid them $15 an hour when minimum wage was $9. I provided health insurance through a group plan I had negotiated. I listened to their feedback, implemented their suggestions, treated them like the skilled professionals they were. Word spread in the immigrant community. People wanted to work for Dignity Services because we lived up to our name. Miguel was my third hire. I found him at 3 in the morning, cleaning the same building where I had seen him months before. I approached him directly. Miguel, I'm starting a cleaning company. I'd like you to join me. $15 an hour, health insurance, respect. I know I'm nobody, and you have no reason to trust me, but I'm asking anyway. He looked at me for a long moment. Why me? He asked. Because you're good at what you do. Because you deserve better than $9 an hour. Because I'm trying to build something different, and I need people who understand what dignity means. He didn't mention the bathroom. He didn't bring up our previous encounter. Maybe he didn't remember me. I'd been just another cruel executive in a long line of them. Or maybe he chose not to remember. Either way, he said yes. The breakthrough came at the end of year 2. One of my clients was a mid-sized tech company called DataStream, whose CEO, Patricia Alvarez, happened to be on the board of Quantum Financial, a massive corporation downtown. She was impressed with our work, with the fact that our cleaners actually cared about the quality, that turnover was nearly zero, that the buildings looked better under our care than they had with the previous company. She recommended us for the Quantum contract. It was huge, a 50-story office building downtown, worth $300,000 a year. I almost said no. It was too big too fast. If we screwed it up, we'd be finished. But Patricia believed in us, and I couldn't let fear stop me. We got the contract. Suddenly, we were cleaning one of the most prominent buildings in the city. The revenue from that single contract allowed me to hire 30 more people, upgrade our equipment, open a small office. We went from a scrappy startup to a real company almost overnight. But success brought new problems I hadn't anticipated. As we grew, maintaining our values became harder. I had to hire managers, and not all of them understood or cared about our mission. Some started cutting corners, pushing workers to go faster, skipping training. I had to fire my first manager, a guy named Rick, for months into year 3. He'd been yelling at workers, docking pay for minor mistakes, creating exactly the toxic environment I had sworn to eliminate. When I confronted him, he was baffled. "What's the problem? We're getting the work done. You're being too soft. These people need discipline, not coddling. That's how the industry works." "Then the industry is wrong," I told him. "And you're fired." After Rick left, I implemented a mandatory training program for all managers. They had to spend a week working alongside the cleaning crews before they could supervise anyone. They had to understand the work, the challenges, the people. It slowed our growth, but it protected our culture. Year 3 also brought investors. I'd been funding growth through retained earnings and small business loans, but to really scale, I needed capital. A social impact investment fund called Horizon Partners approached me. They wanted to invest $2 million for 20% equity. The money would let us expand to other cities, hire more people, make a real difference. But investors meant pressure. They wanted returns. They had quarterly expectations. They asked uncomfortable questions about profit margins and cost optimization. At our first board meeting, one of them, a sharp woman named Ellen Rothstein, suggested we reduce our starting wage to $13 an hour. "The market rate is still around $10, she said. "15 is generous, but it's eating into margins. We could reduce it to 13, still be above market, and significantly improve our bottom line. The workers would still be better off than with competitors." I felt that old anger rising in me. "No, it's just $2, she pressed. "That's still 30% above market rate." "No," I repeated. "We pay 15 because that's what it takes to live with dignity in this city. That's not negotiable. If you don't like our margins, sell your shares." There was tension in the room. But Marcus Johnson from Fresh Start, who'd remained on the board as an advisor, backed me up. "He's right. You invested in Dignity Services specifically because of its model. If you want conventional returns, invest in conventional companies. This works because it's different." Ellen backed down, but the conversation left me shaken. I realized that growth meant constantly defending our values against people who saw them as obstacles to profit. Every new investor, every new manager, every scaling decision was a potential compromise. I had to be vigilant, had to fight for what mattered, or we become just another exploitative company with a nice name. Year 4 was when we really started to take off. We expanded to 3 more cities: Boston, Philadelphia, and Atlanta. Each expansion was carefully managed. I hired local managers who understood the mission, often promoting from within when possible. Maria, who'd been one of my earliest hires, became our operations director. She understood the work from the inside and commanded respect from everyone. The press started noticing us. First local business journals, then national publications. They were fascinated by the model. A cleaning company that paid well, provided benefits, and still competed on price? It seemed impossible, which meant it was a good story. I did interviews, explaining our structure, our philosophy, our results. Some journalists were genuinely interested in the social impact. Others just liked the narrative of fallen executive finds redemption. I let them write what they wanted. The publicity helped us grow. But not everyone was happy about our success. Brightway Services, my old employer, started spreading rumors. They told potential clients that we were financially unstable, that our model couldn't last, that we'd go bankrupt and leave them without service. They undercut our bids aggressively, sometimes offering services at cost just to keep us out. Their CEO, a man named Gerald Hoffman, even called me once. "Thompson, what you're doing is bad for the industry. You're setting unrealistic expectations. Workers are going to start demanding more everywhere, and it'll destroy margins. Stop this crusade before you ruin it for everyone." "Good," I told him. "The industry deserves to be ruined. You've been exploiting workers for decades. If we force you to pay people fairly, I call that a win." "You're a hypocrite," he said. "You worked in finance. You were one of us. Don't pretend you're some saint now." "I'm not a saint," I replied. "I'm just trying to be less of an asshole than I used to be. You should try it." He hung up on me. Brightway continued to fight us, but their tactics backfired. Clients started asking why they were so threatened by us if our model was supposedly unsustainable. Some switched to us just to see what the fuss was about. By year 5, we were the largest cleaning company in the region. Not the most profitable, never the most profitable, but the largest by number of clients and employees. We employed 400 people across 5 cities. Our retention rate was 93%, while the industry average was 30%. Clients loved us because our workers actually cared, because quality was higher, because it felt good to hire a company that treated people well. The business school at the state university started teaching a case study about us. They called it the Dignity Model, Stakeholder Capitalism in the Service Industry. I was invited to guest lecture. Standing in front of MBA students, many of whom reminded me of my younger self, was surreal. I told them the truth. "Most of you want to get rich. That's fine. But there are different ways to build wealth. You can extract it from others, or you can create it together. One leads to short-term gains and long-term emptiness. The other builds something that lasts." Some students got it. Others looked at me like I was naive. One particularly arrogant kid, probably 24, raised his hand. "But Mr. Thompson, isn't your model only possible because you're privately held? Once you go public, shareholders will demand you maximize profits. Your idealism doesn't scale." "Then maybe the problem is with how we structure corporations," I replied. "Maybe shareholder primacy is the bug, not the feature. And maybe businesses that don't go public can still scale. We're proof of that." He smirked, unconvinced. I recognized that smirk. I'd worn it myself once. You can't argue someone out of arrogance. They have to be broken by life first. I just hoped his breaking wouldn't hurt as many people as mine had. Year 6 brought personal challenges. I'd been so consumed with building Dignity Services that I'd neglected everything else. I was 40 years old, single, living in a modest apartment despite being financially comfortable again. I had no social life, no hobbies, no identity outside of work. The company was everything, which meant I had nothing if it failed. My sister, Karen, who I'd barely spoken to since my fall, reached out. She'd heard about Dignity Services and wanted to reconnect. We met for coffee, and it was awkward. She didn't know how to talk to me. I'd been the arrogant success, then the humiliated failure, and now I was something in between. She kept asking if I was okay, if I needed anything, treating me like I was fragile. "I'm fine," I kept saying. But I wasn't sure if it was true. Was I fine? I'd rebuilt my life, created something meaningful, but I was also alone, obsessed, driven by guilt as much as purpose. That's not healthy. That's not fine. That's just functional trauma. Karen eventually asked the question everyone wanted to ask. Do you ever think about going back to finance? You could probably get hired now. You've proven yourself. The thought had never seriously crossed my mind. That person died, I told her. I killed him. I can't bring him back even if I wanted to. That's a bit dramatic, she said. Maybe, but it's also true. We finished our coffee and promised to stay in touch. We didn't. Some relationships can't survive who you become. Year 7. This was supposed to be the triumph, the climax of the redemption story. And in many ways, it was. Forbes did a feature on us. The Janitor's Revenge, how Dignity Services cleaned up the industry. They got it wrong, of course. It wasn't revenge. It was something far more complicated. But the article brought massive attention. National clients started reaching out. We expanded to 12 cities. We employed 2,000 people. By every metric, we were succeeding. But the article had consequences I didn't foresee. My old life came rushing back. Former colleagues from Henderson and Klein reached out, wanting to reconnect now that I was successful again. They congratulated me on my comeback, as if my journey had been some clever career move rather than a desperate struggle for survival and meaning. They wanted investments, partnerships, opportunities. They saw dollar signs where I saw people. Robert Chen called. Robert had been my mentor at Henderson and Klein, the one who'd taught me to be ruthless, to see people as resources rather than humans. He'd survived the scandal by testifying against others, cutting deals, saving himself. He'd landed at another firm, climbed back up, and was now running a medium-sized private equity fund. He wanted to meet for drinks to talk about old times and new opportunities. I almost said no, but curiosity won out. What would it feel like to see him again? Would I feel tempted by that old life? Would I feel vindicated by my new one? I needed to know. We met at the same bar where we used to celebrate deals. Morrison's, a place with leather booths and dim lighting and whiskey that cost more than most people's daily wages. Robert was already there when I arrived, sitting in our old booth, 2 glasses of $50 scotch waiting. He stood and embraced me like we were brothers reunited. Thompson, look at you! I always knew you'd bounce back. We sat. He toasted my success. We talked about old times, old deals, old colleagues. Who'd landed where, who'd failed, who'd succeeded. It felt like hearing about characters in a novel I'd read years ago. Interesting, but distant. Not my story anymore. Then Robert leaned in, lowered his voice, and said what he'd really wanted to say. Listen, I've been following what you built with Dignity Services. It's impressive. Really impressive. The PR alone is worth millions. This whole ethical business thing, it's the trend now. ESG investing, stakeholder capitalism, all that. You're ahead of the curve. So here's what I'm thinking. Let me take you public. We'll do a SPAC, value the company at $200 million. You'll own 40%. That's $80 million, Thompson. You'll be rich again. And once you're public, you can still keep the nice labor practices for a while, but eventually you optimize, right? You do what you need to do for shareholders. You've proven your point. You've rehabilitated your reputation. Now cash out and get back to real business. I stared at him. He was serious. He genuinely thought this was a good idea, that I'd built Dignity Services as some kind of elaborate publicity stunt to rebuild my reputation so I could cash out and return to being exactly who I'd been before. No, I said. He laughed. Come on, don't be stubborn. $80 million. Think about what you could do with that. I said no. His smile faded. Thompson, be realistic. This cleaning company thing is cute, but it's not sustainable long term. The numbers work now because you're small and you're grinding. But as you scale, The model breaks. You know this. You're a finance guy. Eventually, you'll have to choose between your principles and survival. Why not cash out while you can? Because this isn't a performance, I said. This isn't a phase or a strategy or a PR move. This is my life's work. These 2,000 employees, they're not stepping stones to something else. They're the point. The entire point. Robert looked at me like I'd grown a second head. Jesus Christ, Thompson. What happened to you? The scandal really did break you, didn't it? Yes, I said. It did. It broke me completely. And something different grew in the cracks. Something I actually liked better than who I was. That's sad, he said, and I could tell he meant it. He pitied me. In his eyes, I'd been broken and never properly healed. I convinced myself I was happy, but really I was just traumatized, unable to compete in the real world anymore. He finished his drink, made an excuse, and left. I paid for both drinks and sat there alone, staring at the expensive whiskey I hadn't touched. The encounter crystallized something for me. The narrative people wanted to believe was that I'd fallen, suffered, and climbed back up. The classic comeback story. But that's not what happened. I'd fallen, yes, but I hadn't climbed back to where I'd been. I'd climbed somewhere entirely different. And from this new vantage point, I could see that my old peak had actually been a valley. I'd been successful and miserable, rich and empty, powerful and pathetic. Year 8 brought the hardest challenge yet. We expanded nationally, opening offices in 15 cities. We employed 3,000 people. But with growth came the inevitable dilution of culture. It's easy to maintain values when you're small, when you know everyone's name and story. It's exponentially harder when you have 3,000 employees across the country, most of whom you'll never meet. Some managers in our newer offices started cutting corners. Workers in Atlanta complained that their manager was pressuring them to work faster, skip breaks, ignore safety protocols. It was exactly what I'd fought against, happening inside my own company. I felt like I was failing, like all my efforts were just delaying the inevitable corruption that scale brings. I flew to Atlanta personally, fired the manager publicly in front of the entire staff, and spent a week working alongside them, cleaning offices, listening to complaints, making changes. But I couldn't be everywhere at once. I couldn't personally oversee every office. The machine I'd built to oppose exploitation was growing large enough to become exploitative itself if I wasn't careful. I realized I needed a different structure. I needed to embed the values so deeply into the system that they'd survive without me. So I did something radical. I converted 30% of the company to worker ownership. Every employee who'd been with us for more than a year received shares. They'd have voting rights on major decisions. They'd share in profits. If the company succeeded, they'd succeed. If it failed, we'd fail together. My investors hated this. Ellen Rothstein, who'd argued about wages years earlier, nearly quit the board. You're giving away equity? You're diluting our shares? This is insane. Workers don't know how to run a company. They know how to do the work, I countered. And they have the most to lose if we become exploitative. They'll keep us honest in ways management never can. This is financial suicide, she said. Then sell your shares, I replied. I'm not changing my mind. Some investors did sell, but others bought in, attracted specifically by the model. The worker ownership drew national attention. Business publications wrote about it. Labor organizers studied it. Other companies started experimenting with similar structures. We'd gone from controversial startup to industry experiment to potential model for the future. But the real test came in year 9. The global pandemic hit. COVID-19. Overnight, office buildings emptied. Everyone went remote. Our entire business model collapsed. Buildings didn't need cleaning when no one was in them. we faced the real possibility of bankruptcy. Revenue dropped by 70% in the first month, 90% by the second month. I had to make a choice, the kind of choice that defines what a company really is. Lay off most workers to save the company, or keep everyone and risk total collapse. My board demanded layoffs. The math was brutal and simple. Keep everyone on payroll, and we'd be bankrupt in 3 months. Lay off 80%, and we might survive with the essential staff. But I couldn't do it. These weren't numbers on a spreadsheet. They were Maria, who'd worked her way up from cleaner to COO. They were Miguel, who'd finally brought his children to America and was putting his daughter through law school. They were 3,000 people who trusted me, who'd believed in what we were building. If I betrayed them the moment things got hard, then everything had been a lie. I made a decision that most people called insane. I kept everyone on payroll. We pivoted to disinfection services, capitalizing on the sudden desperate need for sanitization. We retrained workers, bought new equipment, and underbid every competitor because we weren't trying to maximize profit. We were trying to survive with our principles intact. But disinfection services couldn't employ 3,000 people. So I cut my own salary to zero. I asked executives to take 70% pay cuts. We tapped every credit line. We burned through reserves. I converted to a partial worker ownership model where everyone took a 20% pay cut temporarily, but kept their jobs and benefits. We all bled together. The uncertainty was worse than anything I'd experienced before. Worse than my fall from Henderson and Klein, worse than those early desperate months. Because it wasn't just my failure at stake, it was the failure of everyone who'd believed in me, who'd bet their livelihoods on this vision. There were nights I couldn't sleep, staring at cash flow projections that predicted bankruptcy. There were days I wanted to give up, to declare defeat, to tell everyone I'd tried and failed, but at least we tried. But I kept going because what else could I do? These people had families, rent, children, dreams. Giving up wasn't an option. And then something unexpected happened. Our clients, the ones who'd worked with us for years and knew our culture, started helping. They created work for us even when they didn't strictly need it. They brought us into deep clean empty offices to disinfect spaces in preparation for eventual return. They paid bills early. They recommended us to others who needed pandemic-related services. The relationships we'd built, the trust we'd earned, it became a lifeline. And our workers, instead of fleeing to more stable companies, stayed and worked harder than ever. They took ownership, literally and figuratively. They came up with innovations, found efficiencies, covered for each other. The culture we'd built over 9 years became our survival mechanism. We weren't just a company, we were a community. And communities don't abandon each other in crisis. We survived. Barely, but we survived. It took a year of desperate innovation, of everyone sacrificing together, of refusing to compromise our values even when it would have been easier. When offices started reopening in year 10, we were positioned perfectly. Companies wanted cleaning services they could trust, services that prioritized health and safety above profit. We'd spent a year becoming experts in disinfection and sanitization. We grew faster than ever. By the end of year 10, we'd not just recovered but expanded. For 1,000 employees, 20 cities. The largest cleaning company in the country. But the experience changed me. It reminded me that nothing is permanent, that success is always fragile, that values need constant protection or they erode. I realized that my job wasn't to run a company. It was to guard a culture, to protect an idea, to fight every day against the natural tendency of systems to become corrupt. Year 11 was when Miguel retired. He was 62, had been cleaning for 17 years, and had finally saved enough. His daughter had graduated from law school and gotten a job at a non-profit defending immigrant rights. His son had finished his mathematics degree and was working as an actuary. Miguel's American dream, delayed and harder one than it should have been, had come true. We threw him a retirement party at our headquarters. 300 people came, workers and managers and clients who'd known him over the years. He gave a speech. I sat in the back, watching this man I'd once demeaned, who'd shown me more grace than I deserved, address a room full of people who respected him. He talked about his journey, about leaving Guatemala, about his children, about the dreams that kept him going through 15 years of night shifts. And then he said something that destroyed me. 7 years ago, Miguel said, someone told me I was only good for cleaning. At the time, it hurt because I feared it might be true. I had been a principal, an educator, a leader, and here I was pushing a mop at 3 in the morning. But now I understand that man was wrong. Not because cleaning isn't valuable work, it is valuable work, essential work, but because he believed that some work makes you worthy and some work makes you worthless. He confused status with value. He thought title determined worth. And he was wrong. Miguel paused, looked directly at me. That man is here tonight. Some of you know he started this company. What you might not know is that his journey began with hurting me, with being cruel, and that cruelty haunted him enough to change everything. He built this company not just for me, but because of me, because he learned what I already knew, that dignity isn't something anyone can give or take away. It's something you carry inside yourself, no matter what work you do. And here's what I want to say to him, to all of you. We all make mistakes. We all have moments of cruelty or weakness or failure. What matters is what we do after those moments. Do we hide from them? Do we repeat them? Or do we learn? Do we change? Do we build something better? This company exists because someone learned. And thousands of people have better lives because he chose to be different than he was. That's all any of us can do. The room erupted in applause. I sat there crying, unable to speak. Miguel found me after, pulled me aside. Thank you, he said simply. I should be thanking you, I managed, for forgiving me, for giving me a chance, for everything. We gave each other a chance, he said. You needed to learn. I needed someone to build this. It worked out. He hugged me, and I held on maybe too long. This man I'd hurt, this man who had saved me without even trying, just by being decent and forgiving and human in ways I'd forgotten how to be. Year 12. Today. I'm 50 years old now. Dignity Services employs 8,000 people across 40 states. Maria is our CEO. I stepped back to chairman because she's brilliant, and I'd become a bottleneck. Miguel consults part-time, training new hires, sharing his story. His daughter works with immigration nonprofits, helping others like her father. The company is valued at $300 million, though we're still privately held, still worker-owned in part, still committed to the model that everyone said would fail. I live comfortably but not extravagantly. A nice apartment, but not a penthouse. A reliable car, but not a Porsche. I date occasionally, nothing serious. My sister and I talk once a month now, which is better. I have friends, mostly people I've met through the company, people who knew me only as this version of myself. People ask me if I regret my old life. It's a complicated question. I regret who I was. I regret what I said to Miguel, what I said to countless others. I regret the cruelty, the arrogance, the casual violence of my indifference. But I don't know if I'd erase it if I could. Without that life, without my fall, none of this exists. 8,000 people have dignified work. Their families have stability. The industry is slowly changing, other companies adopting better practices because we proved it was possible. Would I trade all that to erase my personal shame? I don't know. The honest answer is I don't know. Because the good came from the bad in ways I can't untangle. They're intertwined, cause and effect, oppressor and victim, sin and redemption, all mixed together in ways that don't allow for clean narratives or simple morals. What I do know is this: I'm not the hero of this story. I'm not even sure I'm redeemed. I'm just someone who was broken by his own cruelty and rebuilt by the grace of others. I had the skills and opportunities to turn that breaking into something useful, which is privilege most people don't have. Miguel suffered more than I did, and had fewer chances to build something from it. That's not justice. That's just how the world works. The story people want is simple. Arrogant man learns humility through suffering. But it's messier than that. I learned humility, yes, but I also learned that humility alone doesn't matter if you don't act on it. And the acting is hard, every single day. There are still moments when I feel that old arrogance rising, when I want to cut corners, when I'm tempted to be cruel because it's easier. The old me never died completely. He's still there, whispering that I'm being naive, that I'm leaving money on the table, that I'm a sucker for caring. The difference is awareness. I know that voice exists. I know what it leads to. And I choose, every day, to ignore it. Some days that choice is easy. Some days it's exhausting. But it's always a choice. That's what transformation really means. Not becoming a different person, but choosing differently, consistently, until the choices accumulate into something that looks like change. It's not dramatic. It's not clean. It's just the slow, grinding work of being slightly better today than you were yesterday, knowing you'll never fully arrive anywhere, that you'll always be in process, always trying, always falling short. Dignity Services isn't my redemption. It can't be. You don't get to hurt people, and then use helping others as absolution. It doesn't work that way. What it is my practice. Every day, I practice being the person I wish I'd been. Sometimes I succeed. Sometimes I fail. But I keep practicing, keep trying, keep building, because what else is there? 7 years from that moment in the bathroom to becoming the largest cleaning company in the country. But the real journey wasn't about business success. It was about learning, slowly and painfully, that dignity isn't transactional. It's not something you earn or lose based on your job, or your status, or your bank account. It's intrinsic. Everyone has it, everyone deserves it, and any system that denies it is broken and needs to be changed. I think about Miguel's words at his retirement party. About how we all have moments we regret, and what matters is what comes after. I think about Robert Chin and Ellen Rothstein, and all the people who still believe that maximizing profit is the only rational choice. I think about the young MBA students who looked at me with that same smirk I used to wear. And I think about the 8,000 people who wake up every day and go to work for a company that treats them like human beings. And I think that maybe this is enough. Maybe you don't get redemption. Maybe you don't get to become the hero. Maybe you just get to be someone who was terrible and is now trying to be less terrible, and if you're lucky, if you work hard enough, if you refuse to compromise when it matters, maybe you build something that outlasts your shame. That's not oppressor to victim. That's not villain to hero. That's just being human, with all the complexity and contradiction that entails. It's messy and incomplete and ongoing. And maybe that's the only honest way to tell the story.